Sorry. Saya ulang lagi ya. Good afternoon, selamat siang Bapak dan Ibu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih sudah hadir pada webinar ini. Nama saya Irma Irsyad, saya dari Trade dan Investment Queensland. Mungkin Bapak dan Ibu yang belum pernah mendengar atau tidak familiar dengan Trade Investment Queensland, sebagai gambaran, Trade Investment Queensland adalah kantor perwakilan pemerintah Queensland yang merupakan salah satu negara bagian di Australia. Kantor kami membantu untuk menjembatani hubungan antara Queensland dan Indonesia, terutama di bidang perdagangan dan investasi. Dan kami juga membantu untuk mempromosikan kapabilitas institusi dan perusahaan Queensland di Indonesia. Webinar hari ini adalah How to Present and Influence Decision Through Data. Bisa terlaksana atas kerjasama MBS Academy, BPKP, dan tentunya dengan support dari TIQ Indonesia. Our speakers today, we have Pak Mario Bojilov. He's currently the Director of MBS Academy from Queensland, Australia. Bapak Ben Giles, Trade Investment Queensland from Trade Investment Commissioner from TIQ Indonesia. And we also have Bapak Ernadi Sudarmanto. He's the Prime Secretary atau Sekretaris Utama dari BPKP. Welcome to all speakers today. Bapak dan Ibu, salah satu cara paling efektif untuk berkomunikasi dan mempengaruhi perilaku dalam satu organisasi serta pengambilan keputusan adalah melalui data. Dan cara terbaik untuk melakukannya adalah dengan bercerita menggunakan data. Dan ketika kita bercerita, tidak hanya data yang tersaji. Cerita ini juga dapat menstimulasi percakapan dan memotivasi audiens untuk dapat fokus dan bertindak atas satu topik tertentu. Bapak Mario Bojilov akan berbicara mengenai pentingnya dampak bercerita melalui data, bagaimana otak manusia memahami visualisasi dan belajar menerapkan design thinking dalam bercerita melalui data ini. Sebelum presentasinya mulai, let us hear a welcome remark from Bapak Ben Giles, Trade Investment Commissioner from TIQ Indonesia in Jakarta. Pak Ben Giles, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Irma. Terima kasih. Selamat siang, Bapak dan Ibu semua. Nama saya Ben Giles. Saya adalah Trade and Investment Commissioner dari TIQ, Trade Investment Queensland, di Jakarta. Welcome. As Irma said, Trade Investment Queensland, we help businesses and we connect companies between Indonesia and Queensland in Australia. Today, I'm very happy and pleased to welcome Pak Mario dari MBS Academy, and I thank him for joining, and terima kasih banyak for BPKP for hosting this event as well. Today is going to be a wonderful session, and I want to leave it by just hoping that the information is great, and please, we welcome any discussion and communication later, and Irma will talk more later. So look, terima kasih banyak. We will talk soon. Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Ben, Trade Investment Commissioner from TIQ Indonesia in Jakarta. Berikutnya kita berikan kesempatan untuk Bapak Ernadi Sudarmanto. Beliau adalah Sekretaris Utama atau Prime Secretary dari BPKP untuk memberikan kata sambutan. Silakan Pak Ernadi.
Terima kasih, Irma. Mohon izin saya sedikit lebih panjang, Irma.
Sama-sama Pak, silakan.
Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua, Om Swastiastu, Nama Budaya, Salam Kebajikan. Yang saya hormati para Deputi Kepala BPKP, dimanapun saat ini berada. Yang terhormat Bapak Ben Giles, TIQ Commissioner, yang kami hormati Ibu Irma Irsyad, yang kami hormati Bapak Mario Bojilov, Direktur MBS Academy, para pejabat eselon 2 di lingkungan BPKP, yang kami hormati para pimpinan dan pejabat di lingkungan kementerian, lembaga, dan pemerintah daerah, serta seluruh peserta webinar, serta hadirin yang kami banggakan. Kajian yang disampaikan dalam World Economic Forum Oktober tahun lalu, 2020, tentang tren profesi dan kompetensi di masa depan menunjukkan perlunya percepatan adaptasi proses bisnis terhadap teknologi. Di antaranya adalah penggunaan cloud computing, data analytics, dan juga Internet of Things and Connected Devices. Tren ini didorong oleh revolusi industri 4.0 serta dipercepat adanya pandemi yang menuntut kesigapan penyesuaian proses bisnis. Selaras dengan situasi tersebut, dengan kesadaran tersebut, salah satu kompetensi yang dituntut untuk dimiliki adalah kemampuan analisis data serta data science. Auditor intern pemerintah sebagai salah satu profesi yang memiliki peran langsung terhadap peningkatan akuntabilitas dan efektivitas program pemerintah perlu meningkatkan kompetensinya di bidang data analitik dan juga data science. Hasil pengawasan yang didukung oleh data yang akurat dan analisis yang mumpuni akan memberikan added value yang strategis bagi stakeholders. Semakin bermanfaatkannya hasil pengawasan, tentu akan meningkatkan kepercayaan stakeholders terhadap aparat pengawasan intern pemerintah. Hadirin peserta webinar yang kami banggakan, merespon tuntutan tersebut, Kepala BPKP menerbitkan keputusan nomor 464 tentang satuan tugas pengembangan dan penerapan transformasi digital pengawasan untuk di lingkungan BPKP. Dalam kerangka transformasi digital, salah satu kompetensi yang perlu diperkuat adalah kompetensi data analitik dan juga kemampuan penyajian laporan hasil pengawasan yang efektif. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, merefer pada pendapatkan tahun 2016, partner prinsipal pada Ernst & Young, bahwa memiliki kompetensi di bidang data analitik berarti memiliki kemampuan dan keterampilan untuk satu, mengakses atau mendapatkan data secara online atau juga offline, dan yang kedua adalah memilah, mengolah, dan memaknai serta menyajikannya sebagai informasi yang bermakna. Menilik definisi tersebut, maka auditor internal yang memiliki kompetensi data analitik harusnya mampu menggunakan berbagai media dan perangkat teknologi informasi untuk memperoleh data yang diperlukan dalam menjalankan atau mengelola pengawasan. Yang berikutnya, mestinya mampu berpikir kritis dan kreatif, bahkan inspiratif, mengolah data menjadi informasi atau lebih dari itu yang bermakna bagi hasil pengawasan. Bapak dan Ibu yang kami hormati, yang berbahagia, melalui webinar ini kami mengharapkan kita mendapatkan insight di bidang data analitik sehingga dapat meningkatkan kualitas hasil pengawasan intern. Tentu saja webinar ini hanya salah satu upaya dan kami berharap kita dapat terus berkolaborasi melalui berbagai program pelatihan untuk meningkatkan kompetensi data analytics sehingga aparat pengawasan intern pemerintah dapat meningkatkan hasil pengawasan intern yang lebih banyak dan lebih baik lagi. Kami mengucapkan terima kasih dan mengapresiasi kepada MBS Academy dan juga Trade and Investment Queensland atas sinergi dengan BPKP melalui Pusat Pendidikan dan Pelatihan Pengawasan sehingga terselenggaralah webinar ini. Terima kasih. Demikian yang dapat kami sampaikan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi Santi. Namo Buddhaya. Kami kembalikan Bu Irma.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak Pak Ernadi. Yang Bapak singgung tadi memiliki kompetensi pada data analitik itu akan bisa menghubungkan nanti pada keterampilan lainnya Pak ya, dan semoga webinar MBS Academy hari ini bisa membantu untuk para member dari BPKP semua. Finally, I'm turning to you now, Mario, as our speaker. Today's attendees are mostly auditors, internal auditors, majority from BPKP offices around Indonesia and also other Indonesian government agencies as well as the ministries. And we would like to say a big thank you and express our appreciation and gratitude for Bapak Arif Trihardianto and his team in supporting us by helping us organizing this webinar today, promoting it to their colleagues and network so that this morning we had about 1,200 registrants. So we are really thankful. So Mario, just like I am, our attendees today are all excited to learn from the information that you will be sharing today. And we're hopeful that by the end of this webinar, we will have key learnings to take away and use in the future. Before you start, Mario, I'd like to remind our attendees who are present today, if you have any question, please put them in the chat box below your screen, and Pak Mario will try to attend to them towards the end of this session. Sebelum kita mulai, Bapak dan Ibu, apabila punya pertanyaan, tolong diketikkan pada chat box di bawah layar Anda. Boleh dengan nama dan institusi, Pak Mario akan coba menjawabnya pada akhir sesi ini. So, well, Mario, I'm handing over the screen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irma. And thank you very much, BPKP and TIQ for helping to organize this webinar. I was really impressed actually when I saw the number of registrants. I was actually a little bit scared whether we'll be able to accommodate everybody. We will be able to. So before, let me just share my screen. So before I start, a couple of words about myself. I'm currently the director of MBS Academy, and our focus is on delivering digital transformation and digital risk courses to non-technical professionals. My background is in audit, like the majority of the people in this room here. I started my career in 1994. Yes, I know that I'm old. With one of the state governments here in Australia, and over all that time I have been involved with audit and data analytics. My specialty is primarily data analytics and also continuous auditing and continuous assurance. What I realized over the years working as an auditor is that once we have all of the results and once we find all of the things that we were looking for as some things that we want, suddenly we need to actually communicate those to our stakeholders, internal, external. So at this point in time, I started thinking, okay, we need to do something. And over the last 3 or 4 years, that idea crystallized in my mind that we actually need to start paying a little bit more attention on how we present our ideas, how we write our reports, and how we try and influence our stakeholders. We present to the audit committee, we present to the business areas, and so on and so on. So today, this webinar is about how we can actually present our findings and show people our ideas in a very convincing way. So let's start. What we'll do today, we'll have a look at what is the need for presenting ideas effectively, what is the current situation, and what are the things that we can improve on. Then we'll look at how we can actually achieve that better. What are the simple techniques and tactics that can help us make more convincing presentations and can help us put our ideas across better to various people. And at the end of the session, I'll go through a specific example to show you how these things that we'll be discussing here throughout the session will fit together. And then after that, we'll have some time for Q&A. We have some questions that we have received during the registration, so I will answer some of those, and also will answer some of the questions that may occur during the session. And I'll be relying on Irma's help to help me with those. So before we start, I just would like to run a quick poll, which should appear on the screen shortly. How easy it is for you when you found some data, when you use data in your findings, when you want to support your findings, how easy it is for you to actually use that data and to put it across in your reports or in your presentations. So the poll should appear shortly.
Okay. The poll already started.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the responses at the poll. Seems like about 60% of the people will use data, not too difficult. For some people, it's very easy, and for some people, it's very difficult. So the responses are all over the place. And that's understandable, simply because we use the data in the way that we have always been using it. We'll put a slide, a chart or a graph here or there. And some of us actually go a little bit further with trying to put some sort of animation or some sort of additional effect to draw attention to specific points. But it is a little bit all over the place in a sense that not many people actually have learned or have seen how to specifically deal with data. So when we use a second poll, can we have this one as well? So when you use data and you want to present ideas, and you are presenting to an audit committee or you are presenting to one of the business areas, there are some findings in your report and there are some things that you want to share with the audience. How easy it is, do you get the results that you want when you are telling them what they see on the screen? Do you get the results that you want, or not often? Does your message get across to the audience that you are presenting easily? Can we please start the second poll?
Okay.
We'll close the poll in 10-15 seconds. So if you haven't replied yet, please do so. Okay, so 82% of the people are getting the results and 18% still need some help every now and then, simply because people don't sometimes appreciate what we want them to say. And this is what this session today is all about, to actually show you a different way of how you can put your point across, especially when we're dealing with hard data, which comes from data analytics. So here's the situation. As I was preparing for this session, I came across a report about BPKP in an academic journal. So there's some data about BPKP, some activities and some stats related to BPKP reports. Now, we have some descriptive statistics here in the first table. In the second table, we have some relationships that have been identified, and they show certain things. And then here in the last table, there's some regression that allows us to draw some conclusions from the data about BPKP. So the report is about BPKP. Here's the data, 3 tables. It has been summarized. This is based on a very long very big amount of work over several months. What does it say about BPKP? It's difficult to see from here. Based on these three tables, it's difficult to see what exactly is the conclusion of the academic article in relation to BPKP. So now, what we want actually, we want to be able to present whatever the findings are, and of this academic study specifically, in a way that our audience can grasp the meaning really quickly and can do something with it. So our big issue in a lot of situations at the moment is having too much data and not enough information. The data is there, drawing the conclusions, presenting them in a meaningful way is something which is a little bit of a problem sometimes. So the first thing that we need to keep in mind when we start looking at communicating with the data and incorporating it in our reports is what is the situational background. Okay, so number one, who are we presenting to? Who are we designing this specific part of the report or the presentation for? Now, if we are presenting to line managers or engineers, like here, this is one thing. If we are presenting to senior managers, to the CEOs, to the director generals, this is a totally different thing. We just need to approach our audience in a completely different way with a completely different mindset because they are looking for different things and they are interested in different things. The other thing to keep in mind when we're looking initially to structure our presentation is what do we want our audience to do? When they see our presentation, when they see our graphs, when they see whatever we've prepared, what do we want them to do? What type of action do we want them to take? Should they approve additional budget? Should they approve additional people? Should they approve 3 more audits to be done in province X? All of these things need to be present in our minds when we're designing the presentation. The last thing to keep in mind when we're looking overall at the background is how are we going to present? Now, it is one thing if we present live with using PowerPoint like I am now, because I can explain a lot of things. I have some control because if the audience asks me, I can get the questions and I can answer them as well. So this is one thing. But if I'm sending something in a report, I don't know. I don't know how, when the recipient will read the report. I don't know whether they'll read it in one go or whether they will read it over the period of several days, just reading little bits and parts of it, whether they'll just skim through it and just pick 1 or 2 things that they matter. So all of these things also matter when we structure the presentation. So if I'm doing a presentation, I'll do it in one way. If I'm writing it in a report, I'll approach same information, but I'll approach it slightly differently, simply because the way the message, so to speak, is delivered is different. So number one, we need to know who are we presenting to, who are we communicating to. Number 2, we want to know what we want them to do with the information that we give them. And number 3, we need to know how are we communicating with them. Real time, over email, over printed, over reports, and so on. So these 3 considerations is where we need to start. They would allow us to start structuring our ideas. Now, when we start looking at presenting the data, there are various types of visuals that we can use in order to put our ideas across. Simple things sometimes work really, really well. Simple text, like this one here. 31.077 trillion. That's Indonesian rupiah, by the way. Okay, single number gives you some statistics. Now, this was one of the techniques that Steve Jobs used a lot when he was launching Apple products 10, 12 years ago. When he launched the first iPhone 3, he was using one of those. I've seen his presentation. And in other launches, he was just focusing on single number, putting a point across. It will be good, however, to give it a little bit of a context. So Okay, so 31.077 trillion is the financial loss due to corruption in Indonesia in 2015. Okay, now the context hits me in the eye too much. So what I will do actually, I will make it a little bit fade into the background so that the focus is on the actual number, not on the explanation underneath. And if I want to, I can just highlight one word here, the word corruption, so that actually the number is linked to corruption. So actually what this slide here shows me that there was, due to corruption, there was a loss of 31 trillion in 2015. Finally, I will put a source, because when we talk about numbers like that, there needs to be some credibility. How do I prove that actually the number exists? I got this number from the Journal of Society and Governance. This is actually where the whole article that I will be basing this presentation on is coming from. So simple text can help put our ideas across, and then we just can highlight certain things that we think are important. Another way to present information is with tables. Okay, here's a table. When I was working as an auditor, I was always having one of those on the first or the second page of my report. Just the number of findings, high, medium, low risk, gives you the information straight away. You can focus on the things that matter. Can we make it a little bit more visually appealing and easier to grasp? Well, okay, let me just put the normal traffic light colors here. High is red, medium is amber, low is green. I can see straight away on the high risk, which is what most audit committees are interested in. I can see that there is only one finding. So we'll have enough time during the audit committee presentation to actually talk about it in more details. This is what used to happen to me as an auditor or as an audit consultant when I'll be brought in by internal audit as an external party to help them with their audit plan. Always the same thing, Mario, we won't have time at the audit committee to talk about all of the findings, just focus on the high risk ones, and that will be it. So tables are good. They can allow us to structure information quite well. One thing, however, to keep in mind is that if you are presenting live like I am now, tables shouldn't be there. Tables are actually data. Tables are not information, and they're very difficult to grasp for most of the audience, and there is a lot of guessing, and they are not the most effective way to present unless you want to make a point. And the reason I have the table here is that I want to make the point that the table shouldn't be in my presentation because they can be too complex and they can confuse the readers. So it's better to avoid them. Another type of visual used quite often is the heat map. Okay, so the heat map, it's still a table, but we actually colored certain parts of the table so that we can draw the attention of the reader using colors to specific points in the table. Here's a real example, which I got from the latest report to donations, which is issued by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. This is a biannual report talking about fraud, and it is based on a number of interviews and cases across the world, covers all of the regions. So here is what I can see straight away. If I look at the second row, which is the government and public administration, this is only actually a small part. The actual table is much bigger, but I just want to show you. So in government and public administration, the biggest type of fraud is billing, the first one. In healthcare, row number 4, the biggest type of fraud is billing as well, and it is the highest of all of the types of fraud across all of the industries. Then if I look at banking and financial services, the biggest problem is in column number 3, which is cash on hand. Using colors, I can see immediately what are the areas that I need to pay attention to, and it's much easier to comprehend the information that I'm presenting as opposed to just having all of that in a table with white background where people need to scan and find what are the numbers that are of interest to them. Here I can see in the government and public administration, out of the 4 areas, I have 2 which are of concern. While if I look at healthcare, out of the 4 areas, I have 4 which are actually a little bit too dark and need to be paid, which means they have high incidence of fraud. So with heat maps, we can draw the attention to the reader to a specific parts in the table that we want them to focus on. Another type of visual is the lines. Lines, we're all familiar with lines. We have used them for a very long time. They're very great at presenting trends over time and also presenting relationships. Here's a real graph that comes from my doctoral research, synthetic fraud rate compared to overall fraud rate. So if I look here, I can see that between 2010, quarter 1 2010 and quarter 4 of 2013, overall fraud has increased slightly, while synthetic identity fraud rate has increased 3 or 4 times as much. So that gives me an idea that actually the increase of synthetic identity fraud is much higher. It is higher. This is something that banks and financial service organizations are quite concerned at the moment. So this is something that they need to do something about. So if I was an internal auditor in a bank, when I'm presenting that to managers, I'll say, listen, okay, fraud overall is increasing, but there's a new type of fraud, synthetic fraud, that actually we need to pay attention a little bit more, and we haven't been prepared very well for this one in the last 16 months. Again, highlighting specific things, driving the point across. Slope graphs are used as a visual when we want to compare 2 periods of time predominantly or 2 specific values. Again, going back to the report to the nations from the Association of Fraud Examiners, these are the whistleblower communication channels. Comparing 2018 to 2020, we can see that phone has dropped as a channel, so people are not using phone if they want to report something to somebody in the organization, if they want to report fraud, but they are increasingly starting to use email and web forms. If there is a form on the web, they'll use that. And letters are also dropping. So now, if I'm a risk manager or an internal audit manager, I'll think, well, maybe we need to think, if we are not providing a mechanism for them to tell us about fraud, maybe we need to start doing that somehow. Maybe we can just create a specific email address that needs to be communicated to anybody in the organization, that if you notice something which shouldn't be happening and you're concerned, please use this email to report it. Or here's a page on the web, on our internal website on the intranet, where you can actually submit your report as well. Letters, okay, people are not using snail mail as much anymore. And phone, yeah, we have the hotline, because sometimes people say, but we have the hotline. So actually we already have in place a mechanism for whistleblowers to contact us about fraud. Yep, that's great. But if I look at this chart here, I can see that phone is decreasing and email and web is increasing. So I need to do something about that. A really simple way to drive a specific point across. The waterfall chart gives us an idea about movement and the components of the whole and the parts. So here, for example, can be interpreted in a number of ways, but let's say we had 200 interns, the first one on the left here, 200 interns that joined us last year. Over the period of 3 quarters, 110 of them left. In the first quarter, 20 left. In the second quarter, 50 left. In the last quarter, 40 left, which leaves us with 90 of the interns still with us. So actually, this is not so bad. The interns that join us, a large percentage of them stayed with us, and they've learned the workings of the organization, and we can probably rely on them as future employees. And by the way, this year we're getting another 120 interns that will need to train but as we can see, 60 of them left pretty quickly. So this is not something that we're terribly happy about. Again, depending on what you want to show, it can be composition of revenue, it can be composition of staff, it can be composition of various business activities. Waterfall, when you want to show the parts of the whole, is very useful chart. The other type of visual, okay, bar charts. We've been using those for a very, very long time, and I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I want to mention one thing in relation to bar charts. Personally, up until a couple of years ago, I have been using the vertical bar charts, and I don't know why. Probably that's a habit, probably because this is the first one that I've seen and I started using and copying it subconsciously. I'm not quite sure. But actually, from the point of view of the user and from the point of view of the design, it is much better to use the horizontal bar chart. And the reason for that is that it is easier for the user to understand what we are trying to say. Because on a horizontal bar chart, our categories are on the left part of the chart. And normally, we read from left to right. So when we see the chart, the first thing that we see is the label. Subconsciously, we know already what each one of these bars represents, and as we start looking through them. Nothing against vertical bar charts, simply the horizontal ones are that much better to be able to put ideas across. And we want to make it as easy as possible for the user to understand our visualizations and to understand what we want to say to them. Another one is the maps. These have been becoming more and more popular. Personally, I think they are great. They can very quickly present a lot of information in a limited space. If we look at this chart here, we can see that this specific company has got a lot of employees in India, on the subcontinent, and then a little bit less in China. Australia and the States are the next ones, and then after that is Russia, and there is almost none in South America. Very quickly, we can see what is the distribution of our employees. In relation to Indonesia, which is a country with so many provinces, actually having maps that show the amount of revenue, the amount of findings, or other parameters that BPKP is interested in per province on the map will actually make it a lot easier to communicate ideas and findings or summaries from the activities that BPKP has been involved. Now, one thing when we talk about 3D, there is one specific thing that I would like to mention to you, and if you can stay away from that, that would be great. 3D can be very counterproductive and very misleading. So here's a chart here where we can see that there are two lines. So there is the revenue and there is the expenditure. It's a 3D chart over 4 quarters, and we can see on the vertical axis, on the y-axis is the revenue and expenditure in dollars, in thousands. So I want to ask you a simple question. We're going to run a poll now. What is the difference in Q2 between revenue and expenditure? In Q2, what is the difference between revenue and expenditure? What is the difference between orange and blue lines? Don't worry about the sign. Doesn't matter whether it's a profit or loss. That's not the point of the question. What is the difference in absolute numbers? Can we please have the poll? Okay, so I'm looking here at the results of the poll. So 10% of the people said between 5 and 15, 34% between 15 and 25, 34% 25 to 50, and 22% 50 to 100. Okay, so let's have a look what these two lines actually look like if they were not 3D, but they were just normal 2D lines. Here they are. These are the two lines that you just saw. And if I have a look at the difference between revenue and expenditure, just to measure it a little bit easier here, you can see it's approximately 20. It's approximately 20. But out of the whole group, 34% got it right, 66% didn't get it right. Not because of anything else, simply because 3D can be extremely misleading. I used to have it every now and then, many years ago in my presentations, simply because it looks funky, a little bit more interesting. Personally, I don't think it's worth it. Stay away from it simply because you are not going to be presenting the information that you want. So it's better just to be as simple and as clear as possible with the user, with the participants and the users of your presentations. Okay, so the next thing to keep in mind is that we want our presentations to be as simple as possible and to allow people not to be cluttered when they're looking at our presentations with other things. And there's something called Gestalt Principles of Design, which is used by the professional designers. And what I want to show you here is there are several of them, but I just want to mention four. Proximity. So we think that objects which are physically closer to be belonging to the same part of a group. Okay, so if you look on this picture here, there are essentially three groups of items. The one on the right, which is a little bit bigger, and there are two groups on the left, which are a little bit smaller, so they have something like a title and maybe a few lines of text afterwards. So there maybe not, but just because they are like that, we can perceive. So how can we use that? No, actually, specifically in table designs, when you use tables, when you're sending reports out to various people by email, you can actually group certain parts of the table together. You can make some lines a little bit smaller and some lines a little bit bigger, a little bit higher. So actually we can see two different groups of lines on a table. Subconsciously, I'll think that they are grouped together. Similarity. Similarity is another principle. Basically, our minds tends to think that objects which have the similar color or shape or size, we perceive them as if they belong to the same group. So again, if I look at a table, if I color two parts of the table, one of them light green and the next part dark green, my mind will think, okay, actually, I think that these two parts, the first part belongs to the same group, the second part is something else, but again, it's grouped together. So this way, I can color quarters, I can color different regions without any additional information, just by changing the color, or even just, I can change the type of the font. I can actually make some of the font Times New Roman, another font I can make it Arial. And that would subconsciously tell the reader, yep, okay, I need to look at these two together. These are designed in order to make it easier for the reader to understand what we're trying to tell them. The other one is closure. Okay, so basically, when we look at things, we are trying to fit in even things which are not missing. So here, although you don't see the full lines, we mentally complete the lines to form a square between these two objects. So actually, when we draw graphs, and this is leading to that in a second, when we draw graphs, this allows us to remove some elements which are not necessary. For example, I've seen a lot of graphs that have a border around them. Well, we can remove the border or even the background simply because it just overloads our minds and doesn't bring any additional benefits. We are going to do it subconsciously, so I might as well simplify the graph. The other one is continuation. When something's missing, we'll just mentally continue it. So if we have a row of bars, horizontal bar chart, we can very safely remove the y-axis simply because they're already aligned on their left sides, and we know that they belong to the same axis. Can it simplify the chart? It can. So just these little things, this is just a brief overview of the principles. There's another 3 principles, but just to give you an idea how we can actually start taking advantage of the way our minds think in order to present, to make it easier for the person we're presenting to actually focus on the important things, not on details which are irrelevant. So here's a chart. Okay, so what we want to do with this chart, what we can do with this chart, we can simplify it simply because there are elements here which do not add too much to the information which is already there. Certainly, we can remove some of the markers. There's a blue square marker and orange triangle marker. Are they necessary? Probably not. Do I really need the grid lines at the back? In some cases, if I want detailed information, yes. But if I'm just doing a presentation, probably they are not necessary either, because I can mentally, again, looking at the continuation principle, if we remember just now that I said, I'll mentally continue, I'll see where they fit. So actually this graph can be simplified a little bit more. So what can I do? I can make it like that. Because my main point is I want to be able to convey the information that there was a drop of revenue and expenditure in Q2, then it rebounded in Q3 and 4, and we need to do something about it. Okay, so the graph presents exactly the same information without the clutter around it. Of course, if we want the detail is always available. So we can present the detailed data if somebody says how much exactly was the profit and loss in Q1, because it's not visible here without the grid lines. Well, we can provide that information because it's already available. But in the initial presentation, when we were talking ideas, probably not so much. Now, other things that we can do in order to simplify things, looking at the tables, this is the table that I showed you earlier. Well, one thing that we can do, the borders here stand out too much. When I look at the table, they hit me straight away. Are they really necessary to be that hard? I don't think so. Can we? Oh, sorry. So first is the titles. I want to focus on the numbers. I want to focus on the numbers. And then 165, and then I can have a look what's what, because I also get them colored. But I also don't want the borders to be there. I can remove the borders. If I remove the borders, I still see the same information, but now the borders are not hitting me. I'm focusing on the numbers. I know that number 1 is in the red area, so I better go and check exactly what it is. I just faded slightly the titles because they are less important than the numbers. So I'm making the important part of the information stand out. This way, again, I'm making it easier for the reader or for the person listening to me to understand what I want them to do. Also, we want to draw attention to things which matter. Have a look at this chart here. So we have several lines. How do we draw attention? Before we do that, I just would like to run a quick poll. Again, looking at the chart, there are 4 lines, so have a look. Which line should stand out? So this is poll number 4, please. I think we can close the poll now, so we have a few responses already. Okay, so I'm just looking at the stats from the poll. 40% of the people said the red, 26 blue, orange, 20 yellow, 11, and no idea 4. Well, I'll probably go with the people who have no idea. I don't have any idea either, simply because all of the lines are the same. I'm thinking that probably the way it goes when I look at the results, the way it goes is the brightest colors drew the most attention, which actually I was just about to get to a little bit later. So how do we draw attention to something that we want to emphasize? There's a number of ways of doing it. So number one is we can just make the line that we want to draw to stand out, we can make it a little bit thicker, like the one here. On this graph, you see that there's a thicker line which immediately stands out. On top of that, it's also got an arrow at the end of it. So my eye unconsciously is drawn to that one immediately. I will ignore everything else. I'll just focus on that one. So thickness and color as well works. So thickness is one. So let's have a look, going back to the whistleblower communication channels from earlier as an example. I wanted to draw attention to the web form, because web is increasing, and I wanted to let the people know that we need to pay more attention to the web, and we need to provide a better mechanism for them to submit any reports. So actually, in the chart on the right, I made the web form line a little bit thicker than the others. So as soon as you see it, your eye subconsciously is drawn to that one. This is the first thing you will notice as a reader. Everything else will be ignored. Yes, I'll see the rest of them, but my first one is the thick one. So thickness is one way to influence the reader. Color is the second way. As you noticed before, and this is the first time, mind you, I've run this poll in that form. That was really interesting for me to see that the brightest color actually drew the most attention, but there was no difference between them. But here there is a specific difference. So with color, we can emphasize certain lines, or we can emphasize certain time periods. So looking back at the same graph, as you can see here, I made the web line orange. So when you see this graph, the first thing that you see is the web form communication channel. The rest of them, you will see them. The one is the web form, the orange one is the first one that you will see. It is the first one that you will read the two numbers next to it. I can also emphasize it using color. I can emphasize time periods, for example, like that. Okay. Now I want everybody to pay attention to what happened in 2020. I make it a little bit darker. So immediately as we see the graph, our eyes are drawn straight away to 2020. We'll look at that one first, and only then we'll work backwards to what's happening in 2018. So these are just little ways to draw attention to specific parts of the graph, while at the same time cleaning unnecessary information. So drawing attention, all right, so we talked about thickness, we talked about color. Another way is just by putting a line. Okay, so here is a set of vertical bars. We wanted to emphasize some sort of a threshold, which bars are below by a bit, by a much, which bars are above. Just draw a straight line across. Immediately when you see the graph, your attention is drawn to the line, to the black line. And subconsciously after that, the first thing that you'll think about, you'll notice are the bars which are way below the October, July, and April. These were the first things. This is where your eye will be drawn. So again, if I want to make a point about something that's happened in April, July, and October, I will definitely use something like that, and my readers will know exactly what I'm talking about. One last thing that I wanted to mention is when we are presenting, when we're talking, I mean talking in terms of visual presentation or whether we're writing, make sure that you follow the natural pattern of reading. We read, with the exception of a few countries, we read from left to right, from top to bottom, and then from left to right. So our reading patterns left to right, then scroll down to the next line, and then go left to right. This chart, this slide here, by the way, I on purpose messed it up so that it doesn't follow the pattern, just to show you that it does provide a little bit of an uncomfortable feeling when you go, because I went first top left, then I went down to bottom right, then I went back to top right, and then eventually I ended up in bottom left. So totally unnatural. I just want to demonstrate the point that it doesn't feel natural. When you're presenting, just make sure that you follow the normal reading pattern, which is the most natural for all of us. Left to right, top to bottom. Okay, so also in terms of making it easy for people to understand what we're saying, how do we present text specifically? Because text is a big part of when we try to influence with data. Appearance. Now, simple things work best. This is a very simple font. It just shows key point 1. That's it. This is the type of font which shows exactly the same point, which is annoying, difficult to read, and quite often I see that in reports, I see that outside on the street, and I'm wondering, why did you do that? I don't have the time to think what you're trying to say, because some fonts are actually quite unreadable. Well, some fonts are really clear, some are pretty bad. Yes, they look funky, but the novelty wears off pretty quickly after you've tried to read a document with that font or title with that font. So keep it clean, keep it simple. Fonts like that do not really add anything to your objective of influencing people and getting them, presenting to them what you want to say. Couple of things to keep in mind about fonts. If you want to emphasize something, definitely use bold. It's good for titles, but it's also good even in text sometimes. So bold is good. If you want to emphasize something, but a little bit less, use italic. Italic is good for slight emphasis. So it is not in your face as much as in your face as the bold one is, still very powerful. The one which is the most powerful one and the one that you really need to be careful with is the underline. Underline stops you reading straight away and you focus just on the underlined piece. It needs to be, it is very powerful, however, it needs to be used very sparingly. Otherwise, people will get tired of it and people will basically switch off. They'll start ignoring everything. So use it sparingly, but it is a very important point. I use it quite often in my reports and in my writings, but I try to stick probably to 3 to 5 words per page, or 3 to 5 double words per page, which I underline, not much more than that. Otherwise, if I want to underline, to emphasize something slightly, I'll use the italic. It does wonderful things. One thing to keep in mind is that we have limited real estate, so to speak, in our report, and we need to use it very wisely. Titles are very important and they are precious. So be careful what you call your titles. When you have a chart, pay attention to what you are calling it. You just need to think about the chart titles the same way as the headlines in a newspaper. Newspaper headlines, they have only one purpose. Their purpose is to get you to buy the newspaper and to read the rest of the article. Hopefully it will be of interest. So here's a picture of an Australian newspaper from quite a few years back, actually, that's 2008. Just Sack Yourself Premier. Okay, this is the title on the front page. The only purpose of this title is to get you to buy Daily Telegraph on that day. I don't think that the Premier will sack himself, but it draws the attention. Same with your chart titles. It's 80% actually of catching the attention. Same with your email subject lines, by the way. When you're writing an email, I don't know how each one approaches it, but personally, I do spend a fair chunk of time on the subject line, because I want that email to be opened. So I do spend a chunk of time on the subject line. Same with the chart. Spend a bit of time on the chart title so that you can, because this is the first thing, one of the first things that your readers will see. You want to grab their attention at that point in time and then continue. Another thing to keep in mind in relation to text is simplicity. Now, I know it's not very easy to achieve simplicity in corporate reporting, and I've been struggling with that for the last 21 years. Nevertheless, I'm still trying. Some of the most powerful lines in the world are actually short and up to the point. As Shakespeare said many years ago, or many centuries ago, to be or not to be. And that line has gone through time, and a lot of people know it. So there is no need to be overly complicated. There is no need to use complex words and complex sentences. One really useful tool that I would recommend, that I'm using myself, and every single team that I managed, I make them use it. Some of them are not terribly happy about it, but they still comply. In Word, there is something which is called readability test. Readability statistics, sorry. It sits in spelling and grammar, under spelling and grammar. At the end of, when you do a spelling and grammar check, at the end, Word will show you the readability statistics. At the bottom is the readability statistics. And this is what you need to pay attention to. The second last, which says Flash Kincaid grade level 10.6, means that somebody in grade 10 can easily comprehend what you are saying. If the grade level was 15, that means postgraduate academic writing. So somebody, to understand what you're saying, they need to have a postgraduate degree. So if you have grade level above 15, think about and rewrite some of your sentences. Grade level 11 or 12 is academic writing at a bachelor degree. Personally, I try to get it down to level 8 or 9. And the reason for that is that I want to make it easy for my readers to understand what I'm trying to say. Not that they're in grade 8 or 9, definitely not. But we are all very busy at the moment. We all have so many priorities in our lives and so little time to deal with all of them. So the best way to actually get a reader to pay attention to what we are saying is to make it easier for them to read. So the lower the grade level, the easier it is for the reader, and they are more likely to actually finish reading what you've written there. So think about the readability stats in Word. They are great under spelling and grammar. And this is something that we can easily use simply because everybody's got Word, and it's part of the standard Word. There's no optional add-ons or anything like that. So now, once these are all the things that we can do, so to speak, at a tactical level, little tricks and tactics here or there to make it easier for our readers. But at the end of the day, we want to look at it a little bit more strategically. We want to tell the readers a story. Stories have several components. This is Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, who told us what these components are. The components are, the story has to have a beginning, it has to have a middle, and it has to have an end. This is what we want to achieve in a story. So we want to be mindful that when we are looking at telling stories with our data and influencing people, we want to draw their attention to that one. One of the reasons for that is that PowerPoint presentations are logical, and we don't get influenced by logic too much. We get influenced by emotions. This is what one of the best screenwriters in Hollywood says. People are most influenced when they actually work on emotional level. On a logical level, we are not. You may convince me, then I'm not going to do it after that, no matter how convinced I am, because I don't like whatever you said. But if we have a story, if we actually start getting a little bit deeper down, that's a different thing. So we want to be able to put everything into context and to have a little bit of a story. Here's something, as I was preparing yesterday, I came across something really interesting visualization from the World Food Program, hunger map. Okay, hunger monitoring system. Before we begin, here's the story of hunger. They tell you a little bit about what was happening over the years, a little bit of a background, what is undernourishment, what is the target here, the bottom right corner, SDG target 2.1, and hunger and ensure all people have access to food and so on and so on. And they just tell a story. Again, some additional statistics from the same site, and then they give you the final. Today we have 1 billion people who don't have sufficient food consumption, so on and so on. And then you get to the actual map. So before you actually see this thing here, you actually have some background in your mind. What does exactly this thing represent? And by the way, this is in real time. So all of these circles that you see here, they're all changing color all the time. They're changing color, they're changing size. It's actually a really interesting site to have a look at. So how do we do that? Now, the beginning, we have to state a problem and say that something needs to be done about it, which I did in the beginning of this session. I told you that there is a problem because there is too much data that's difficult to understand, and how do we deal with it? And in the middle, we just have a look, how can we deal with the problem? So we have a problem, and now we have to deal with the problem. So we have to be the heroes solving the problem in some way. And I said that in the middle, we're going to actually look at these things here, several items that actually would allow you to communicate better with data. And these were the items. And then at the end, we're going to do something else, and we're going to present what is happening with BPKP based on that article that I mentioned. So we haven't got to the end yet. We're coming close to it though. So, excuse me for a second. Okay, so now, what I want to say, the article that I mentioned says that BPKP is doing a great job. Okay, and the article says that they collected some statistics and they looked at 128 different results, and the corruption is minimum is 0, maximum is 4.5 cases per province, and there is 1.287 on average. That the audit opinions minimum is 1.8 and the maximum is 4 and the mean is 3.2. These are all data that I got from the article and based on that collection. So based on this table, we have created another table where we looked at some correlations and relationships between different variables in the study. There's about 12 variables here, and based on this table, we also removed 2 of the variables, which is the gov size, the size of the government, and also the wage growth in a specific province, because they are skewing the results in the wrong direction. And once we've removed it, we ran everything else, and we did some regression analysis, and these were the results that we have achieved, that we have obtained. And as a result of that, based on these three tables and the work that we've done before, we concluded that BPKP is doing a great job. This is the story. So think about it. BPKP did a great job, and I showed you three tables full of data with various types of statistics and data in them, and correlations and results of regression analysis. And now we're coming to the next poll, our last poll in the session, where I would like to ask you a very simple question. Did I convince you, just telling you all that BPKP is doing a great job? Can we have, please, the poll? So how convinced were you, looking at this data and this information here, that BPKP is doing a great job? Okay. So 86% said that I've convinced you that BPKP is doing a great job based on that. Okay. I'm a little bit surprised, I must admit, to be honest. But let me just show you a different way of approaching the same situation with the same data, but in a slightly different format. Okay. So, corruption loss in Indonesia is 31.1 trillion rupiah in 2015. By the way, if you remember, the initial figure that I showed you at the beginning was 31.077, there is no need to go into that level of detail when we're talking about background and summary. So the background here is 31.1 trillion Indonesian rupiah. A sample of 128 BPKP reports was investigated as part of this research, which were written between 2012 and 2015. They've identified that there were 1.29 fraud cases in each provincial government for the period of time on average, with the maximum being 4.5 and the minimum being 0. So some provincial governments have close to 5 cases of fraud on average, while some, close to 5 cases of fraud, while some other provincial governments had 0. The average audit opinion was 3.87. This is a mistake, actually, it was 3.2. I just noticed it as I was presenting before. Apologies for it. So 4 is unqualified, 3 is qualified, adverse, and disclosed. So 3.87, that's pretty good. What they've realized that there was a positive relationship between the irregularities of findings uncovered by BPKP auditors and the levels of corruption. So basically the conclusion here is that because of the enhanced, or because of the strong audit activity from BPKP, more irregularities were uncovered, which led to more corruption to be identified. The underlying corruption was there no matter what, but because of the uncovered irregularities and findings by BPKP auditors, they uncovered the levels of corruption. So this way, the report demonstrates that this is what the article says, that the operation of BPKP is highly effective and it's following the mandate of the President Law number 192. Enacted in 2014. So when you think about it, let's see for a second, and the source is the Journal of Society and Governance. So when you think about it, there is a big difference between this slide here, when I still went through 3 tables and said that they show that BPKP is doing a great job, versus this slide here, where each one of these parts actually presents the same information exactly, but in a totally different way, and actually allowing the reader to focus on the information that we want to present to them. So now our point was, okay, we wanted to prove that BPKP is highly effective. Yes, here's the proof. These are the hard facts. The other one shows the same thing. Which one of the 2 can be understood better? My choice would be the second one. So this is how we actually turned data from it is a fairly dry academic paper, actually, 14 pages, quite difficult to read. I must admit that I spent a fair bit of time reading the paper and trying to identify all of these conclusions and to turn them into graphs. But we can actually turn a very dry material into a story that is easier to present to an audit committee, to a board of directors, to senior managers. This is the end of my presentation. Just before we finish, I have a couple of things to say. When we have data, our main aim is to turn data into information. And that doesn't always happen. I've seen a lot of reports where data just remained data and the insights from the data weren't available. So people didn't get the information and it was quite difficult for them to understand what is being said. The other thing is, it is not rocket science. Every single thing that you saw here in this presentation, every single graph was done using Excel. I didn't use any specific tools. The specific tools do exist, but they require some learning. So then this is not the way to start. Excel provides the tools to cover 80 to 90% in relation to data storytelling. There are some advanced Excel tactics that I have used here, but nevertheless, it was all within standard Excel. There was no additional things. The only other tool that I would recommend, it's a free tool, which is used by, I've read about it first in the Economist journal, QIS. It's a tool that can represent map data easily. So you can use it to generate maps of data. So if I look here, and the story that I just said, I said there are 1.29 average cases of fraud per province, but it's possible to actually draw a map of all of the provinces with the specific number of cases on each colored by a different color. For example, the ones with the highest levels of fraud would be the darkest, and the ones with zero fraud cases would be white, and anything in between. So QIS and Excel are the two tools that actually will serve your needs very well when you try and start presenting your data in terms of stories, looking at the tactics that we specified, looking at the various tactics that we talked about here, but also keeping in mind the big picture that we want to give a little bit of background. We want to take the reader through a sequence of steps in order for them to understand what we are trying to say to them, as opposed to just giving them the final result. So this is all from me. Thank you very much. Now is the time for the Q&A, and as I said, we have a couple of questions that have been a few questions that have been asked during the registration process. There is a couple that I picked and I would like to specifically answer because they are quite close actually to my heart. I have been involved, as I said, with data analytics for a very long time, and also training data analytics, talking to people about data analytics. So one of the first one was, let me just find it. Just excuse me for a second.
Rio, would you like me to read out the question for you?
The one about the IT background. Yes, I found them. Thanks, Irma. So the first one, how to be expert in data analytics without having IT background. Now, this is a big misconception that you need to have IT background to be an expert in data analytics. This is very, very far from the truth. Actually, I come from IT background. I'm an electronics engineer. I didn't become a data analyst because I'm an electronics engineer, actually. It just happened by chance for me to be involved with data analytics. I never was thinking that I'll become a data analyst, but it was the first job that I got when I came to Australia. And that's how it started after that. But you don't need IT background. The only thing that you need, because I have friends who work in data analytics and they come from any possible background that you can imagine. The only thing that you need is actually desire to work with technology. And this is a big thing because actually, apart from running corporate training, I also teach at the universities, at 3 of the universities here in Brisbane. And I do come across a lot of accounting students specifically who do not want to deal with technology at all. The further they are from technology, the better. So if you don't like technology, it's not going to work out. However, if you like technology, if you are not scared, and if you are willing to think critically, data analytics is not rocket science. Just like data visualization is not rocket science, you can start very simple and you can progress to very complex things. I just finished a data analytics course for auditors last week for Saudi Arabia. We were talking about exactly that. You can start with some simple things where you can get results in audits, and then you can progress to complex things like big data and artificial intelligence, but you don't have to start there. And by the way, none of these require you to be an IT expert. I use that analogy. When you think about Formula One, Formula One drivers are not car engineers. They are drivers. They know how to drive that car. Engineers know how to build the car. IT people know how to build the tools that you need, but you as auditors know how to use them, or can learn how to use them very easily. Because IT people don't understand the risk. They've got not no idea, but not too much of an idea. Coming from IT background, I do have a lot of friends in IT. And I know that when they talk about their job, risk is not their first thing in mind. Their first thing in mind is to deliver the software, to deliver the solution. Risk is somewhere there. But for us as auditors, it's a totally different thing. So you don't need IT background. You just need to be willing to learn and not to be scared of technology. The second one was, is historical data a prerequisite for building a data storytelling, in addition to up-to-date and expert narrative? Yes and no. It depends on what you want to say. Now, there was a case several years ago here in Brisbane. It was a case of fraud that went over 8 years. It was in one of the largest companies in Brisbane, Leighton Consulting. Over 8 years, the finance manager stole $20 million. When you're talking about that, you need to have a look at the historical data, simply because you need to quantify what has happened in order to present to the board. But sometimes you don't have to, because like you saw today, when I was talking about the communication channels for whistleblowers, sometimes it's enough just to have the data from last year, from the previous period when it was available. And then you can present. So it depends on context. Sometimes you need the historical data, sometimes you don't. So these are the two questions that I picked. Irma, any others? Some of them that you picked?
All right, Maria, we have quite a lot. Hopefully you will be able to answer them before 4 o'clock. Okay, I'll read out the question for you. Yeah, it'll be easier.
Okay, please do.
Okay, let me scroll down. Oh, this is a lot. Okay, hold on. Please bear with me. Okay, this one is from Bapak Wisnu Indrawan. Pak Wisnu asked, data collected from many sources should be well managed and easily assessed in order to be used when needed. Furthermore, the data must be updated and valid. So BPKP or institution must provide funds much more to maintain the information available. So this is more like, please comment. So he would like a comment from you, not a question.
Might be difficult for me to comment on questions about funds and budgets as an external, but yes, data needs to be easily accessible. Usually it's not. In the projects that I have been running, always the biggest issue for us, about 70% of the time has been spent on accessing the data and making it available for analytics. Only 30% is the actual analysis, which is a real problem, especially when I'm working when I was part of an organization as an employee. That was easy or easier, but as an external consultant, the client doesn't see what you do because they only see the analytics and they are wondering why are they paying so much. So commenting about that, yes, the data needs to be always available and present. Initial investment in something like that will pay off further down the track. So the return on investment for a solution that would manage the data and keep it available will take several years, probably 2 to 3 years. Eventually it will pay off, but yeah, the initial investment will be there. But the flip side is that after that, what I've seen in my personal experience implementing continuous auditing systems is that it's much easier for audit to perform a range of reviews and a range of investigations specifically. And sometimes you need the data available to you, especially when doing forensic work, because when you start doing it, sometimes it's too late and you cannot get it anymore. So there's a number of considerations here. But the return on investment definitely is there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario, for the answer. Pak Wisnu, I hope that answered your question. Let's move on to this next one. Ibu Ani Yulianti from BPKP asked, what is the data indicator that shows that the data has a good quality?
The quality. This is something that I think there's a little bit of a misconception here about quality. So, number one, personally, I'm never concerned about the quality of the data. I'm always concerned about the completeness of the data. Let's get all of the data. Let's not worry about whether the data is clean, whether the quality is good, and so on and so on. Now, once we have the data that we need, then we'll start looking at the quality and what is the indicator. We know what the data should look like. So basically, we know that if there is 0.1% of records which are problematic, that's one thing. When there is 5% of the records which are problematic, that's a totally different thing. So the quality will depend on the process. But what is important to keep in mind, never go for data with quality. Always go for all of the data. Because once you get the data which is considered quality data and the rest of it has been removed, you get the sanitized view. As an auditor, I never want the sanitized view. I want the real view. So I want to see all of the dirty, messy, whatever data so that I can make a conclusion. Is that normal or not? I'll discuss it with a number of people in the organization. But as I said, 2 records in a million, which are problematic, not exactly the best situation, but it's okay. 5% of the records which are problematic, to me, that shows a problem with IT controls, a problem with the process, some sort of a problem somewhere that shouldn't be there. So focus on the completeness more than on the quality.
Thank you for the answer. And I think the next question from Pak Rahman Junaidi, you already answered most of it. He asked how to ensure that the data can be used as the base for the auditor. Would you like to add on that?
Okay, so it depends what type of data. So the data that you are talking needs to be relevant to the process that you are reviewing. All of the data, I personally think, can be used depending on the audit review. This is something that I usually teach in our data analytics course when I go through the planning process. But what we need to keep in mind always that it is very important to consider the fact that data analytics is not a technology initiative. Data analytics needs to, just because it has the word data, it's not a technology initiative at all. Data analytics is a business initiative or another tool in the toolkit of auditors. So data analytics need to be linked very closely to the terms of reference for every audit review. So when you link it to the terms of reference, then you know if the data that you have is suitable or not. So the way it goes, you start with the terms of reference, then you look what you need to do, and based on that, you start looking at the process where there can be some data or not, and then you go further down. But it always starts with the business, in this case, terms of reference. It always ends with the business, some sort of a data storytelling with data in an audit report. So it starts with the terms of reference, ends with the audit report. Everything in the middle, yes, it's important, but these 2 are the most important parts of data analytics. Data analytics for the sake of technology is a losing proposition.
Thank you, Mario. Hopefully you answered Pak Rahmat's Junaidi question. And one question from one of the participants. The question is, the lady wants to ask your source of theory or information. Would that make sense, Mario?
I have many sources. Okay, so there is not a single one.
Okay.
Difficult to say which one specifically. A lot of it is based on my experience. A lot of the more formalized sources are based on ISACA materials. Some of you may know about ISACA, ISACA. This is the IS Auditors Association. I must admit that I'm biased in relation to ISACA because I have been an ISACA member for 22 years. I was also the ISACA Brisbane president for 3 years, and I served on ISACA international committees for years. So my view can be a little bit biased, but nevertheless, I think that ISACA is a really good source of material when I want to actually have a look purely at the audit side. When I'm trying to link them together, there is one source, and if you do a search for him, his name, he is a friend of mine. I used to catch up with him every now and then before COVID, now a little bit less, but I will put his name here in the chat box. He's Professor Miklos Vasarheli. I told him once that I consider him the father of continuous auditing. He said that this is not right. Stop saying that, but anyway, that's my opinion. And the second one, Professor Peter Best from CQU. With Professor Best, I do catch up a little bit more regularly because he lives in Brisbane. He is also an expert in data analytics, and he's my sounding board quite often in relation to that. So these are the two sources. Other than that, difficult to say, but if you're a member of IIA, I'm not, but if you're a member of IIA, I know that IIA also has got a lot of rich material in relation to some of these things. But one thing to keep in mind when talking about data analytics, my focus would be more on material coming from non-technical companies and organizations, ISACA, IIA, professional organizations, as opposed to the technical organizations. So Computer Society of Australia, Australian Computer Society, they do have some stuff, but I'm a member of both. But the thing is that the technology societies have more the technology focus, and we want to pay more attention to the business focus. So this is the only comment I can make.
Thank you, Mario. Let's move on to the next one. We have quite a lot here. This is from Pak Krishna Kusumo. When we try to find or collect data, sometimes we think that those data are related and can be used for our ideas. The more data we get sometimes make us confused. So this is about confusion here. Which data really fit to our ideas to present? What suggestion would you give about this situation? I think you answered a bit part of it. So over to you, Mario.
Yes, thank you. Well, I have to admit something. I do get confused myself sometimes. So this is something that we all have to go through. My suggestion would be, I have always had a really good relationship with people from IT, and specifically with people from the so-called functional analysts. These are people who are responsible for developing, enhancing the applications in an organization. Like like for example, if I'm looking at payroll, I'll try to go and talk to the people who are supporting the payroll application. If I'm doing something in relation to accounts payable, I'll go and talk to the people who are supporting the finance application. They know the data inside out. In most cases, they are willing to help and share their knowledge. So they have been my best friends in relation to that, because quite often we can get confused which data should we use. Should we use this table or that table? Should we use this field or that field? You cannot get that answer unless you get a second opinion from someone. One thing to keep in mind is, no matter how friendly those people are, they have their own jobs. So when you go to them with a question, do your homework and give them a few scenarios. Just say, is this and this okay to use or not? Don't just give them 1,000 data items and say, which ones here should I pick? You're not going to get the answer. So a little bit of preparation and then confirmation of your conclusions usually worked for me, always worked for me actually.
Okay, so you're saying that give them an alternative to solution. So just not problem, yeah, Maria?
Yeah, give them something to comment on, not just something which is open-ended. Give them something small to say, is this okay? Yes, it is. Not out of this big bunch of data here, which one should I pick? It's difficult to say.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Next one, Ibu Dita Sulistiani. She asked, in my case, we have various data, so we need to select some as sample. How do you know that data we use can represent all the data to draw conclusion? You answered part of it also.
Okay, I have a special view on samples. I avoid them as much as possible. So I don't like sampling. The purpose of data analytics is not to sample whenever you can. The purpose of data analytics is to actually analyze the full data set. If you really have to use sampling, there's a number of techniques that have been publicized all over the world, and you can get information on them from ISACA or IIA. This is stratified sampling or random sampling, but I would like, unless you have to, because sometimes it's simply impossible. But if you have a data set which is easy to process or relatively easy to process, never sample. And I'll give you one example about sampling. I know about all of the mathematical and statistical background and all of these things. But when people try to tell me that sampling is so cool and we can use it all the time, I ask them that. Imagine that you're sitting in a Boeing 777 on the tarmac at Jakarta International Airport, and you're just about to take off. And the person next to you tells you, do you know what? This plane was part of a batch of 100 planes. And out of that batch, they sampled 2 planes and tested them completely. And based on that, they concluded that the whole sample is good. Now, you don't know whether you're sitting in one of those 2 planes or whether you're sitting in one of the remaining 98 planes. This is what sampling is. So if possible, just avoid sampling. The whole purpose of data analytics is to remove sampling as much as possible. The only exception to this rule, is if we sample exceptions. If we identify too many exceptions, it's okay to sample them. But to sample the original data set, no.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, this is a bit similar to the previous one. From Ibu Farah, how do we ensure that the data we collect is valid and accurate?
Okay, so one way to go about that is actually to get the data from the source. This has always been my preference. This is what I've learned from my first boss. When he hired me, he said, listen, we want to develop here a continuous auditing system that would be looking at the data as close as possible to the source. It was a retail organization, so they were collecting the data from the retail terminals. The data was getting sent to the central computer system for various processing, but we were getting not the data that was processed by the central computer system. We were getting the data that was coming from the terminal. So this is the cleanest possible data. And after that, you can start working with it, and then you can really see what are the differences between your processing and what the central computer system does. So this is the true value of audit. So get it as close as possible to the source. This is the only thing I can say. If it's not clean, that means that there is something wrong with the application that needs to be fixed, but all of the other problems have been avoided.
Okay, thank you, Mario. The next one from Pak Andika Rahmat. What is the best strategies maybe what are the best strategies that could be applied to answer the challenge of collecting and processing data in big country like Indonesia, where not all area have the infrastructure or human resource or capability that we are needed to produce the data that we need.
Okay, so one of the things that I always say, as I said, you don't need IT background to process data. You don't need IT background to actually work in audit and to establish some sort of a process or mechanism to collect data on a regular basis, let's say monthly or quarterly. Once you start collecting the data, I appreciate the fact that Indonesia is a really big country, but with today's technology, the size of the data matters less. Just to give you an example, personally, when I started my working life in mid-90s, I was, as I said, I was working for a retail organization. The smallest data set that I could find in order to do my testing was 90,000 records. That was the smallest. Usually it was about 2 to 3 million per week. That's in mid-90s. And we processed it. We're using very ancient technology, so to speak. I don't think that many people here have seen that technology, like 486 computers. Some of you might have read about them. And it was working. Today, the size of the data is not an issue. So collect it. The only thing that in terms of strategy, yes, there is a lot of differences. I appreciate that the skill levels across different Indonesian provinces are totally different. There must be a champion. But at the same time, everybody can be that champion. We don't need an IT guru for that. The IT guru is there just to send the data to audit. After that, we can sort it out ourselves as auditors.
Okay, thank you. The next one will be from, Bapak dan Ibu, we will provide the e-certificate after the webinar, yeah? So they will be sent out to you. And let me scroll down. From Bapak or Ibu Sri Danarto, how ethical it is to display valid Windows address data. Have you ever did that, and how often did you do?
No, no. Well, I cannot remember. It's not very ethical, so I don't window address it. I don't window address it. I don't consider it ethical.
So it's a no-no, yeah.
All
right.
I'm not gonna display it to the world. So probably if it's too sensitive, you just talk to a very small group of people. But if it is, it is. You just need to do it.
All right, the next one. Okay, this is to answer a few questions from the attendees that Pak Mario's PowerPoint slides will be sent over after the webinar, as well as the link to the recording to the video after the webinar. Thank you. And okay, this is the next question. Okay, this is a bit similar to the previous one. What is the best strategies if data that we use not completely sure? Is it any assumption can be used?
You can use assumptions. It depends on the situation. Now, I guess you need to talk to the business area. If at the end of the day, if you're not sure and the business area is not sure either, there are some problems there in the process. That's how I'll treat it. It's not a data issue anymore. There are some deeper issues there. So difficult for me to give a one-size-fits-all answer, but I will discuss it with people that I trust, because you don't want to get information from people who actually can mislead you on purpose, which can happen. but you know, in all of the places, what is the information that for the people that you can trust. If nothing else, trust the data. Okay, we're going back to the same thing. Try to get it as close as possible to the source where it was generated without any intervention by other applications and programs, and analyze that.
Okay. Trust the data, yeah? And Mario, we'll still have a lot to go. Hold on. Please bear with us. Oh, this is a lot. I think you touched on this previously in your one of your slides. I'd like to ask question to Pak Mario from Bapak Muhammad Ikhlas. What tools or apps do you suggest to conduct data analysis for auditing?
Okay.
Government around exactly. Why do you suggest it or them? As far as I know, there are ACL, Tableau, Power Query, etc. Thank you, Mario.
So, all right. So the tool which I personally like the most is called KNIME. I'll put it in the chat box here. It's spelled K-N-I-M-E. KNIME. This is the tool. This is a tool that is available for free to be downloaded and to be used legally in an enterprise. So there is no licensing issues here. KNIME is a tool that we use in our data analytics training to train people to do some simple data analytics, replacement for Excel essentially, going up to running artificial intelligence exercises within KNIME for the purposes, trying to do predictive analytics, for example. Both of these, so from here to here, from very simple to very advanced, KNIME sits in the middle. ACL and IDEA, which are very similar, and they are competitors to each other. I've used them both. Now, if you have licenses for ACL and IDEA for the whole team, just keep using them. That's basically the only thing I can say. In most places that I've been, there is usually several licenses, but not for everyone. So they need to be shared. So this is a bit of a headache. Now, there are also, the problem is that with some of these tools, you need specialized training. And unless you have an ACL or IDEA guru, it's not going to happen. The other tool that I like is Excel. And then sometimes I will use Excel, but I'm doing it less and less. I'm using KNIME mainly for all of that. And when we do some data analytics exercise with my teams, I ask them to use KNIME. It's very, the reason I like it, it's very visual, it's very user-friendly, and it allows you to link to a number of different data sources and start with simple data analytics and move on to data science in the same place. So that's, so my preference is KNIME. Tableau is not personally, I haven't touched it in the last 3 years probably. Last time I touched it, Tableau was a visualization tool, not a data analytics tool. So you had to massage the data somehow outside Tableau and use Tableau to present it and to explore the data, which is fine. But Tableau was just looking at the end of the process. It wasn't available throughout the whole process. So this is my problem with Tableau. But if you have IDEA or ACL in your department, by any means, just keep using them, but they do have some limitations. If you hit the limitations, think about that.
Thank you, Mario. Whoa, the question keep coming up. Hold on, yeah, let me scroll down. Bapak Sri Danarto, this is interesting. Is it okay to use animation in presentation, and how much does it take?
It is okay, but it needs to be very sparing. Otherwise, you may actually get the focus too much on animation versus putting the ideas across. But yeah, I do use animation sometimes in my presentations. I used to have used to be a site, it's down now, which was showing the number of cyber attacks in real time across different countries. So when I wanted to show people what is happening, that was about 7 or 8 years ago, when cybersecurity wasn't on anybody's mind. Now things a little bit better. I'll just show them what's happening in real time as animation, and everybody's, wow, really? So yes, it is okay, definitely, but not too much.
Okay, I thought I thought before that 3D is cool. I like to use it in charts, but only now I learn it's will mislead you sometimes. All right, move on to the next question. What was from Bapak Anan Bahrul Khoir? What would you suggest if we are good at storyteller or data, but okay, this is interesting. But the stakeholders we are trying to convince are bad story listeners. Thank you.
Oh, you need to improve your storytelling skills. That's what I would say. Okay, think about it this way. Where does the storytelling, the whole storytelling concept come from? Now, okay, so this is a little bit cultural, so I'm not sure whether I'll be hitting the right chord here, but the Little Red Riding Hood, the fairy tale, is it known in Indonesia, Irma? You know?
The Red Hood, it's more like to Western stories.
That's all. All right. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are some fairy tales which are known in Indonesia. And everybody remembers them. Doesn't matter whether they're the top manager of an organization or they're just starting as a graduate. This is a story, right? So there are things that hit us on an emotional level. As I said, the purpose of a story is to look at our emotions. So nobody is actually sitting there looking forward to a presentation. Most presentations are boring and most people don't want to be there. Our job is to catch their attention somehow. So I think that we just need to keep polishing our storytelling skills. As I was preparing for this presentation, I read a few, quickly managed to scan a few different books on data storytelling, also specifically on storytelling. Remember the guy that I mentioned, the Hollywood scriptwriter, he had some points about that. And when you look at the movies, doesn't matter whether it's Hollywood, Bollywood, or wherever, they still follow a fairly standard pattern. So there is a problem, then there is the hero that comes that needs to solve the problem, then the hero goes through several stages and ideas and actions and solves the problem eventually, and at the end of the movie, most movies anyway, at the end of the movie, everybody's happy and the hero comes back and becomes an even bigger hero. Becomes a hero because he wasn't a hero at the beginning. Nobody knew about him. So this is the story. So it doesn't matter what the audience is. I think that all audiences are the same. We just need to catch their attention somehow and keep holding it. So it doesn't happen overnight. It's basically like running, I think. If you've never run, you're not going to run a half marathon next month. It will take probably 4 months of training.
Thank you, Maria. So your suggestion is to improve your storytelling skills, yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe they're not that bad, listener. It's just that you need to convince them. This is like selling your product. If your product is good, but you're not good at telling them, it's going to be challenging to sell your product into the market. Okay. Ibu Husaini Irnawati, are this method applicable just for PowerPoint presentation or applicable also for letter-based report, considering they are official letter rules, especially for government offices, yeah?
Yep. It's applicable to letters as well. As I said, we just need to approach it slightly differently and put a little bit more information, simply because we do not have control over how the readers will interact with our product. Here, there is a little bit of a control. I know that we're going to finish within our 15 minutes, and I know what I'm going to say, in what order. I know that slide, I know how the slides are following each other. When you send the report, you don't know whether they'll start reading it from the front, from the back, from the middle. But it's definitely applicable, so they are different, certainly some ways. You put a little bit more information because I said a lot today and didn't put too much on the slides, but when you are there, you can actually put a little bit more on the actual page. Now, in terms of the rules, now this is something that it's difficult for me to comment. I don't know what the rules are. Now, if there is a rule that says no graphics in a report, well, don't know how you're going to deal with that one, to be honest. But I haven't seen that in my working life, not just in Australia, because I've worked I've run training and worked with organizations. I haven't been to Indonesia yet, but I've been many times to Malaysia, Singapore, and the Middle East. So most reports allow graphs and charts in them. So this is not, so you're not going to be bending the rules. Most reports allow tables to be presented in them. Now, the rule don't say you actually you have to have all of the rows in your table to be 1 centimeter high, because you can make some of them 1.5 centimeters and some of them you can make 0.7 centimeters in order to drive your point across, as I was talking about the Gestalt principles before. The color used to be a problem before. It's not as much anymore. I used to work at Brisbane City Council here, a very large organization, and they banned color because we were printing and they wanted to save on color toner. Most of the documents these days are distributed by in electronic form, so no printing, no color. By the way, I do not like too much color. Color needs to be used sparingly. There are certain colors which are okay in corporate context. There are certain colors which are not okay in corporate context, and I'll stay away from them. So rules cannot exclude any possibility for data storytelling. There is still something. And usually you don't need to bend them too much actually to do something. The idea is to keep it simple, and that would fit within the rules quite well.
Okay, noted. Keep it simple and follow the rules, yeah?
Yep.
All right. Wow, it's getting more and more questions. Hold on. From Bapak Igusti Ngurah Satria. Hang on, Mario.
Yep.
Hold on. If I have some data, let's say some graphic about corruption index from 2000 until 2021. How can we make the storytelling about this graphic? Just use the data in graphic, or we can add by some information related with it. Thank you very much.
Well, the whole point of storytelling is to have some additional information to put it into context. So you can just have one graph, but that's not the point. The story has got several components. Remember the beginning, the middle, and at the end. Okay, so at the beginning, if you have the data for 2021, I don't know what the data is for 2020. Maybe 2021 has increased or maybe it has decreased. So if you compare the two, you can make a point, okay, well, things are getting better because we have been applying new techniques, and because that led to a decrease in fraud by 10%, we actually know what's working now, we need to do more of that. So this is the end. Or no, it's not working, the fraud has increased from 2020 to 2021. We need to change what we are doing, we need to do more audits in certain provinces. By the way, we need to look at the data not across the whole as an aggregate, but across different provinces, because I'm pretty sure that even if it increased as a whole, certain provinces have decreased. Well, let's go and have a look what these people are doing. So this is all part of the storytelling and getting the detail of the data and summarizing it at a high level. So these are just two suggestions, but again, keep in mind beginning, middle, end. So you have the data, which is the middle. What was the beginning? In what context are you looking at that data? And what do you want to achieve once you present the data to someone?
Thank you, Mario. Let's move on. Okay, this is still about storytelling. How effective, from Ibu Wari Puspitasari, how effective does the data storytelling can convince the audience, especially when they are not the visual types? I've also found some person prefers the report in letters instead of charts or pictures.
Well, there are exceptions to every rule. I don't know what the statistics is. I'm just trying to bring it up in my mind, but that was something that I've come years ago. It was psychological research. We are all visual, and actually after a presentation, people will remember, 86% of the people will remember what you looked like. 10% of the people will remember what you said and how you sounded. How you sounded, and only 4% will remember what you said. So we are all visual, and with data storytelling, we're catering to those types of people. Yes, maybe it's not going to work for everyone. As I said, not story is a story. Whether we're looking at a fairy tale for kids or at a movie from Hollywood or from wherever, not everybody likes all of the movies, but 80% of the people have common taste, and this is what we're trying to do. If we are just doing a presentation for one person, well, you need to take that into account. Sometimes it doesn't work, but I think that it will be a very, very rare occasion.
Thank you, Mario. I hate to say that will be our last question for this session. We don't want to hold up the attendees today because they have other commitments too, and Mario is not really well. So hopefully for those who ask, those attendees who ask the question but haven't been answered, Pak Mario will be able to answer them personally through emails after this webinar, ya, Pak Mario? Yep, and we'll wrap up. Bapak dan Ibu, terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu semua yang telah berpartisipasi pada webinar hari ini. Kita dapat banyak sekali pertanyaan, sayangnya waktunya tidak cukup, tapi nanti Pak Mario akan menjawabnya personally lewat email. Terima kasih juga untuk tim BPKP, Bapak Fadil, Bapak Fahmi, Bapak Arif, dan Bapak Ernadi hari ini yang telah membantu dan memberikan support untuk terlaksananya webinar hari ini. Dan dalam beberapa hari ke depan, ini ditanyakan oleh banyak attendees tadi, kami akan mengirimkan email kepada Bapak dan Ibu yang hadir hari ini. Di dalamnya akan ada PowerPoint slides dari Bapak Mario hari ini, dan juga link ke rekaman webinar hari ini, sehingga apabila ada rekan Bapak dan Ibu yang tidak bisa hadir, bisa melihatnya di link tersebut. Dan mohon bantuannya apabila Bapak dan Ibu berkenan untuk mengisi survei yang akan kami masukkan juga pada email tersebut sebagai bahan masukan kami pada event-event yang akan datang bersama Bapak dan Ibu, dan akan bisa lebih baik. Kontak details Bapak Mario dan saya akan kami masukkan juga di email tersebut apabila ada pertanyaan atau Bapak dan Ibu mungkin ingin berkomunikasi lebih lanjut dengan MBS Academy. Sampai jumpa lagi pada event bersama Queensland pada masa yang akan datang. Stay safe, stay healthy, and be happy. Selamat sore, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was great to be here.
Terima kasih banyak Bapak Ibu.